My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and this video will wrap up the Fellowship of the Ring as far as changes or other details that Peter Jackson put in the movies that only super fans of the novels would notice. This one is a weird grab bag too, let me tell you, because some of it is details that are not exactly from the book, but which are very much hinting at something in the book. Some of them are changes that make things opposite the book. It's just all over the place. So let's dive in and see what we come up with. The first one is Haldir's remark to Frodo and then Aragorn about Frodo carrying great evil with him and that they can't go any further. This one is one that I kind of criticized in my recent video on extreme nitpicks of Peter Jackson's Fellowship of the Ring. But it is interesting because it also is reminiscent of something that Aragorn tells Boromir in the book. In the book, when they're about to head into Lothlorien, Boromir kind of hangs back and Aragorn looks around like, what are you waiting for? We got to go. And he says, yeah, Lothlorien's kind of creepy. I'm not going in there. We've heard things about that place. And Aragorn basically says, there's no other way we can go that's safe, but you know, the only evil in Lothlorien is what a man brings with him. So, that's not the exact quote, but it's something along those lines. And it really is kind of reminiscent to this idea of, you know, Frodo carrying something of great evil and bringing that into Lothlorien. Now, Aragorn's words to Boromir are actually kind of prophetic because Boromir of the company is the one who's bringing in some kind of evil thoughts, and that is ultimately going to be what gets him in trouble later. And it seems to be in some way his time in Lothlorien and being examined mentally, let's say, by Galadriel that seems to really bring it to the forefront in a way, because up to this point he hasn't been noticed as being all that interested in doing anything with the ring. He's had his differences of opinion, but it's only after this that Boromir really starts to do things that really hint at the war in his own mind. So it's really interesting that Aragorn says that to him, because it seems like he brings that in and then it just gets amplified after the fact. So it's, like I said in my video about the extreme nitpicks, Haldir saying this is kind of weird because how would he know? But it is, in a way, a bit of a callback to that moment between Aragorn and Boromir. Similarly, the arrangement that's made in the book is kind of similar to what happens in the movie, but in a weird way. This is one of the changes where it's different than what happens in the book, but not exactly opposite. Peter Jackson has Haldir basically flatly refuse to let him go any further, and Aragorn has to convince him to let them in. In the book, Haldir lets them in, but he basically says after a certain point, hey, the dwarf has to be blindfolded, and this is just like the rule. I don't make the rules, but we got to do it. Gimli gets all upset, and ultimately Aragorn resolves the problem by saying, okay, we'll all be blindfolded, just to make it so that it's not unfair on Gimli. And the interesting thing here is, in both situations, Haldir is, forbidding something that is really hampering the quest, because Gimli almost comes to fight over this. I mean, this is a big deal. But later on, he gets a message basically saying, hey, they're all free to walk in Lothlorien, it's fine, and everybody gets unblindfolded. Whereas in the movie, it's just, it all gets shrunk down into this one decision of, you can't go any further, okay, fine, you'll come with me. It all gets reduced down to nothing, and again, this is like a movie-telling medium. You can't introduce too many minor subplots without dragging the pace of the movie down too much. So it's like Peter Jackson taking all of that tension and just reducing it down to this one little thing, which is overly simplistic, but it kind of gets the job done. Now the next thing is one where it's not in the book exactly, but it's hinting at something in the book. And that is the fact that once you get into the center of Lothlorien, Caras Galadhon, in the movie, everything kind of starts seeming like it's going at a really slow motion pace. People talk slow, they move slow, nothing happens very fast, especially where the elves are concerned, but even in general, it seems to be the case. This doesn't happen in the book exactly, but we do get hints in the book that time doesn't seem to pass normally in Lothlorien. And the clearest example we get of this is after they've left Lothlorien and they're on the boats floating down the river Anduin, and Sam looks up at the moon and is like, isn't that the same moon we had when we entered? We haven't been in there a month. And Aragorn's like, yeah, actually, we kind of were. And he mentions the fact that, the time flows on. It's not really experienced quite the same way in Lothlorien. So Peter Jackson never gives us that explicit reference to the idea that the passage of time seems different, but this slowing down is something that hints at that idea. And this is something that really everybody probably noticed, in the sense of, everybody notices the fact that everything seems to slow down a lot in terms of movement and speech and pace of everything going on. But unless you were really familiar with the book, you wouldn't pick up on the significance of it at all. It would just seem kind of weird, which the first time I watched it, it seemed kind of weird because I wasn't remembering that little detail from the book either. But the more you know, the more you recognize it, and you're like, I think I see what you did there, Pete. While they're in Lothlorien, Aragorn and Boromir have a conversation, and one of the aspects of that I critiqued, which is the fact that, Aragorn tells Boromir to get some rest, and on the other hand, he also didn't let Gimli get any rest, which I found kind of ironic. But the interesting thing about the conversation with Boromir between the two of them is when Boromir waxes poetic about the beauty of Minas Tirith, he ends up asking, Aragorn, have you ever seen it, or whatever, and Aragorn ends up saying, I have seen the White City long ago. Now, people who have read the books, and especially the appendices, will know, and this will come up again in the Two Towers, of course, in the only in the extended cut, I think. But in this conversation, he says he's seen the White City long ago, and if you read the appendices, you know that he actually did serve under the pseudonym Thorongil under Denethor's father, Ecthelion II, and so he really has been in Minas Tirith before, probably for an extended period of time. So when Boromir is describing all this stuff and asking him, have you been there? And he says, I've seen it. He's really, that's a reference to something in the book. That's legit, so, but you wouldn't know that if you didn't read the appendices, because I don't think he ever mentions it in the main story itself. Now, here's a pretty significant point of change, and you probably wouldn't have to be a really big fan of the movie to the book to notice this exactly, because it's kind of an obvious one, but the significance of it is a really important point. When Frodo goes to the Mirror of Galadriel in the movie, he's alone. But in the book, Sam accompanies him. Frodo sees something like the same vision that Sam would have seen in the book in the movie. Frodo just kind of gets that whole thing himself. Sam doesn't get it. And it's interesting because it really changes the dynamic of what's going on. In the book, Sam sees a vision of bad things happening back at home in the Shire, which might be happening in the present, as far as we know. We will later find out that something like what he saw definitely has taken place, because Saruman's thugs have taken over and, all that stuff. In the Scouring of the Shire chapter, we find all this out. But in the movie, it's purely given as this is what'll happen if you fail. That's what Galadriel tells Frodo. In the book, she tells Sam much the same thing. She says, this is something that may happen, not necessarily will happen. Nobody really knows. And you may only cause it to happen if you turn aside from your quest, which is kind of a hint at like a very Greek tragedy type of, you know, mixing of fate and choice. It's like, if you try to escape your fate, that's probably exactly how you'll end up doing it, right? You know, you could think of a number of Greek tragedies like Oedipus and whatever, where the hero only ends up doing the thing that he is fated to do because he tried to escape his fate in the first place. Galadriel kind of hints at something like that dynamic to Sam in the book. But in the book, it's Sam who gets this vision, and it's really his kind of temptation moment. Of all the moments in the entire story, this is the one where he is really tempted to do something besides his one job of following and taking care of Frodo. In the movie, we don't get any of that dynamic at all. We just get Frodo seeing it, and Galadriel says, I know what it is you saw. That's what would happen if you should fail. Which, you know, you don't get any of the subtle nuance of, you know, that reference to like a Greek tragedy type of literature. You don't get, you know, Sam's tension of having to choose between his own father, for goodness sake, and Frodo. And, you know, there's just so many things lost there. It's a change that Peter Jackson makes, which again, compressing down for the movie is probably part of the reason for that. But it changes a lot, but it keeps in that core idea at the same time. So we still get this hint at the Scouring of the Shire in the movie, but it is just a hint. Now this next one is a change, but it is a change which is in service to something that is, you know, very much out of the book, and that is the gift giving by Galadriel and Celeborn. The change here that I'm specifically thinking of, because there's more than one, is Sam getting rope. In the book, Galadriel gives him a box with a bunch of powder or dust or something and a giant seed, which you don't really find out really what all that is until the very end of the story of the Scouring of the Shire, and it turns out it's basically magic, you know, miracle grow plus a Malorn tree seed. And, you know, this is what Sam gets so that he can redo, you know, all the trees in the Shire, basically. And that doesn't work in a movie where you don't do the Scouring of the Shire. It becomes a pointless gift, right? So we can't do that. So instead, he gives Sam elven rope. And the significance of the elven rope is the fact that even though in the book everybody gets the elven rope, it's Sam who makes the most use of it. And it's also Sam who, way back in Rivendell, thought to himself in the book, not in the movie, although this is kind of hinted at in the movie too, why don't I have rope? I meant to get rope. And then it's like, well, it's too late. We're about to leave and I can't get rope now. In the movie, this is hinted at because we see Sam kind of going through stuff after Frodo's woken up and he's like, what have I forgotten now? And Frodo's like, are you already in a hurry to go home? So we get that little hint at Sam thinking, I've forgotten something. And that thing is rope. But in the book, you know, he specifically says rope to himself. And he's like, well, I'll have to want it. I can't get it now. And then they finally get to Lothlorien. And what do you know? There's rope. And of all the people that are in the company, the only one that we know that will end up using the rope is, in fact, Sam in the Emyn Muil. So, you know, it's a change, and a change for, you know, a pretty significant reason, but it is hinting at that very specific tension that Sam has with himself in the book. All right, here's one where Peter Jackson just completely reverses the book, and for no particular reason. I don't see that this one was really necessary at all. And that's Galadriel telling Aragorn at their parting that we will not meet again, which is unnecessary for starters, but also, like I said, completely opposite the book. In the book, what happens is they have their parting, and then when Aragorn marries Arwen later on, Galadriel is there. Like, the whole dynamic between Gimli and Éomer in the book is missing, so this doesn't really come up as much. But in the book, Éomer and Gimli have this whole thing where Gimli is Lancelot to Galadriel's Guinevere and defending her honor against Éomer. And they resolve all this whenever both Arwen and Galadriel are at Minas Tirith for the wedding. And Gimli's like, are you ready to say that Galadriel's the most beautiful thing ever? Or do I have to kill you? And Éomer says, I'm not going to say she's the most beautiful, but in my defense, it's Arwen. And Gimli's like, okay, fine. Well, none of that happens because we don't have Galadriel going to Minas Tirith. And I'm like, why not? There's no particular reason why she can't be there. But it is a minor point in the story. It's kind of a really small subplot. It's not a big deal. It kind of gets lost in the rest of the stuff. And, if you really pay attention and remember a lot, you would know all this. And the other thing about it is the superfans would be the ones who would understand that Galadriel is Arwen's grandmother. Like, she's a relatively close relative. And so it's kind of weird that she wouldn't be there for her wedding. That seems kind of a weird move. Why wasn't she there for her granddaughter's wedding? That's kind of... Also, if you really pay attention to the book, and again, read the appendices, you know that it's probably Galadriel who kind of set up Aragorn and Arwen as a thing. Because Arwen hadn't really fallen for Aragorn, but Aragorn at one point is in Lothlorien after doing a bunch of stuff, and Galadriel dresses him up real nice while Arwen is there, and then they meet again, and that's when Arwen really falls for Aragorn. Is that maybe Galadriel kind of playing matchmaker? We don't really know. It's not explicitly stated, but it's certainly a possibility that that's what's going on. So all these little details are lost because Peter Jackson has Galadriel inexplicably, and for no apparent reason, tell Aragorn, we won't meet again. Like, okay, sure. All right, we're getting close to the end here. The second to last detail that I had was the Argonath. The Argonath is a thing in both the book and the movie, but they seem to be two different things a little bit. And one of the reasons for that is the real only reason for it is their appearance, but in two different ways. One of them is, in the book, the two statues are said to be holding axes. And if you look at some of the artwork that's been done of the Argonath over the years, I know for sure Ted Naismith, I'm pretty sure it's his that I know has axes. I'm pretty sure there's others who have as well, but the one that I always think of is Ted Naismith's. But if you look at it in the movie, they're very clearly holding swords, and one of them is clearly Narsil. So you could see why they did that for the movie, because it's a reference to who it is. And that's actually the other change, because the other change here is who the two people are. Because it seems fairly clear in the movie that the two individuals represented in these statues are Elendil and Isildur. That's not who it is in the book. In the book, Aragorn specifically states it's Isildur and Anarion, the two brothers. And the reason that this would have been done this way is because when the Númenóreans who survived the drowning of Númenor came back to Middle-earth and established their realms, Elendil established Arnor in the north, where Aragorn is from, and Isildur and Anarion, the two brothers, established the southern kingdom of Gondor. So it makes sense that the two of them, not Elendil, would be the ones, kind of marking the border of Gondor's territory. But, this is like a teeny detail that we move past pretty quickly in the book. So unless you're really paying attention, you just kind of miss that. All right, here's another one, and this is the final one. And this is one, again, where you it's not as obvious in the movie as it is in the book, actually. Because in the book, a big deal is made out of the fact that Boromir's horn was cloven during his final battle, because it comes up a few times. It's mentioned when Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are taking care of him for his, not exactly burial, but effectively burial, right? Faramir mentions it to Frodo and Sam, and then Denethor mentions it to Gandalf and Pippin. So you can't really miss it, but you might not even notice it in the movie unless you were really paying attention until, of course, we get to the Return of the King. Denethor is holding the cloven horn, and he's like, "Can you explain this?" At which point it's really obvious that the horn is split in two. But in the movie, in the Fellowship of the Ring, we see it is cloven in two at some point, but it's during the middle of all this action scene and all this, and we're not necessarily paying attention to that one little detail because we're more worried about Boromir getting killed by Uruk-hai. But it is there, and that is a very definite reference to a thing that is in the book and which becomes a big deal over time as it gets mentioned more and more by different people. So that the fact that they did that was, it's nice that they included that detail for those who knew to pay attention for that detail. So that wraps up the Fellowship of the Ring as far as details. Stay tuned for Two Towers stuff regarding the same topic in the future. And of course, if you enjoyed the video and want to see more stuff like this, please do give it a thumbs up and share it around. If you're on any of the video platforms, make sure you subscribe, and on YouTube, make sure you click the bell icon so you don't miss any future content. Check the description below for other support and social links, especially the platform formerly known as Twitter, where I drop regular Tolkien-related trivia questions. And until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially Paul Leone, Nathan Dufour, and Robert Kindling.